The entrepreneurial journey is rarely straightforward. It's unpredictable,
Challenging.
Collaborative.
Risky,
Transformative.
and often deeply personal.
the VentureWell Voices podcast offers an inside look at the changemakers using science and technology to solve the world's greatest challenges. Hear their stories of the messy, meaningful path from idea to impact.
Welcome to VentureWell Voices. I'm your host, Christina Tamer. Today, we're going to talk about sweaty palms, writing a book while on maternity leave, and what it means to be a scrappy entrepreneur. If any of those are interesting to you, please stick around and please join me in welcoming my colleague, Véronique Peiffer. Welcome, Véronique.
Thank you so much, Christina.
So
Thanks
happy
for
you're
having me.
here. Yeah, this is great. You are a former entrepreneur. You now have a successful career in biotech. You're a mom and you are a published author. I have the book right here, The Scrappy Entrepreneur. We'll talk about it more in a few minutes, but let's go back to the beginning. Can you share a little bit about what led you to become a founder?
Yeah, so I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Then I worked in business consulting, management consulting in Belgium. That's where I was originally from. And I was always interested in healthcare. I've always known I wanted to work in healthcare just as an engineer. And so in management consulting, I was advising some pharma clients. There are a lot of them in Belgium. And I realized I wanted to move more to the medical device space because as an engineer, I wanted to work in healthcare. Medical devices seemed like the best fit for me. And that's when I came across a textbook called Biodesign. I found it on Amazon. I bought the book. It's not a thin thing. It's
No,
like
it's a big book.
really big book. And I read it front to end, and I thought this
Oh.
is amazing. It really helped me understand what comes with innovating in the device space. It helps you understand what it takes to find a problem that is worth solving. It helps you understand, navigate the regulatory landscape, reimbursement, IP, all the aspects that come with innovating in the medical device space. And on top of that, I saw that there was a fellowship at Stanford University that taught you even more of that process. So I thought, perfect, I'm going to apply for this. I probably won't get accepted anyways, but let's give this a try. And a year later, I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's where I've been for the past 10 years.
So cool. Such a huge move. I remember now that you say it, your management consulting experience was very useful from my perspective for you and you're running your startup. We met in the E-Team program when you got some grant funding for the startup you were working on, and you were very organized and diligent, which I appreciated. And I could tell that came from your professional experience.
Yeah, definitely. You're drilled to kind of do it in certain ways, and that I feel like is always stuck for me.
Yes. Yeah. Very reliable. And good at following through, which was helpful. And we'll get into that on the nitty-gritty components of running a startup. But just a little bit more on your startup. I know there was a very, personal need list that you and your co-founder had identified. Can you share a little bit more about that unmet need you identified?
Yeah, so when I moved here to participate in biodesign, I didn't really know anyone. So we ended up having a house with 3 of the biodesign fellows where we lived together for that year at Stanford. And because we were so embedded in this space of innovating the medical device space, we decided to do this also in the evening. So with my later co-founder, we started to just put a list of our own unmet needs on a page. So we both contributed. My co-founder Justin mentioned that he was suffering from hand sweat and had been for most of his life. I put I get very cold fingers in winter. There was a medical term for that as well. But that's what I put on the list. And we had a bunch of other things. And what you do learn in biodesign is don't just start solving a problem, right? The first thing you need to do is understanding if the problem is worth solving, in the sense that will you be able to make that sustainable, whether it's as a business or in different ways. But so you look at, is there a market? Are there sufficient number of people that suffer from this problem? What's the IP landscape like? What's the regulatory reimbursement pieces of it? And so that way we kept going back to the sweaty hands problem. And so we ended up working on that.
Yeah, and you did so much during that time, right? People might dismiss that, right? If you haven't experienced it, or if you're like, okay, well, sweaty hands, just go like this. But it's nerve-wracking. It's like an actual, polymer hyperhidrosis, I believe, is a technical term. It's something that is a very real condition, and you helped raise awareness around that and then made a really tangible, real solution to address that problem. Can you just share a little bit of a reflection? I know you're not operational in the company anymore, but what did you learn from that experience at the highest level that made you want to turn this into lessons learned for others?
Yeah, I felt like going through the process, and I love reading. I read up quite a bit on entrepreneurship before this whole journey started. And I felt like going through that experience, there were a bunch of things that I had to do that every entrepreneur that I talked with was going through as well, and kind of suffering from, as well as just things that we had to do and kind of didn't really know was part of the journey. And felt like I never known that going into it. So I realized, even though I read up on the topic, there was just these topics that have been missed in literature. And as kind of the company started winding down, I decided to just make a list of, these are the things I really don't want to forget. And they evolved around fundraising, because I think when you read a book about fundraising, or you see, there's been a 10 million round here or there, you forget that there is the first 50K, the first 100K, and maybe I should even say the first 5K.
Yeah.
They can be really hard to get initially, and it's something that, yes, you can learn about in networks and kind of entrepreneurial networks will talk about it, but it's kind of not out in the open. So that was one topic. Building a team, learned so much from having to find people on a tight budget. Like, we didn't have all that much money and still needed to convince really good people to come work with us. So that's another topic that I felt like I wanted to not forget what I learned in that journey. And then finally, there are all these like administrative tasks that come with being an entrepreneur. And I wanted to have some more realism around that as well.
Yeah. And that says a lot. Like, you not only read the biodesign textbook end to end, you also had obviously immersed yourself in these other programs and read a lot of entrepreneurship books. And, you've been able to put those all together and your personal experience into this book, The Scrappy Entrepreneur: How to Effectively Lead an Innovation-Driven Startup, which is available now. Thank you for the advanced copy. I think it's really compelling that you were able to take very, very tangible, practical lessons learned and takeaways for future entrepreneurs, or current and aspiring entrepreneurs that are still earlier in their process, to share that with them. I think that was like a big transformational moment for you, right? Like, actually taking that list that you had reflected on and saying, "There's so much here. I could turn this into something useful." Tell me a little bit about that book writing process and how you got into that whole journey as well.
Yeah, I definitely had expected going into this journey that I would end up with a book, a written book. But so I already mentioned, a company was winding down. I made that little list of, these are the things that I personally really don't want to forget. And I had that in a notebook, put it away on the shelf. And it was only 2 or 3 years later that I was ready for a second maternity leave. And I needed a project. I had one for my first maternity leave, and I said, I need something else than just changing diapers and et cetera. It's really amazing to be able to take care of a little one, but I felt like I always like to keep my mind busy on other things as well. And so that's when it came to my mind of, hey, I had all these notes around things that I didn't want to forget. Why don't I try and do something with those notes? And I had very low, I didn't know if that was going to work out, of course. So I didn't want really to
hope
put
so.
too
Yeah.
much pressure on myself. But
Yeah.
I ended up having a baby that slept really well. Surprisingly, that doesn't always happen. So I can't say too much about that. But I ended up being able to write quite a bit in the 3 months that I was on mat leave. So I wrote most of it. So 70% was probably written. Then it took another 2 years to get where we are now. So
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
it published
That
because
was
it takes a lot of time. You don't realize in the beginning, but you write the book and then you need to get some feedback. So you need to give a couple months for people to look at it and give you feedback. Editing takes time. Finding a publisher takes time. But it all adds up over time as well.
Yeah, it's its own entrepreneurial journey in many ways,
It really is. Yeah.
different from, the innovation-driven startup that you made, but it is, your content, your intellectual property, so to speak. So let's get into some of the specifics, because I know you really focus on, in particular, these nitty-gritty tasks and things that are overlooked or underappreciated or underestimated, the responsibilities that an entrepreneur has, and especially doing those things on a lean or a non-existent budget, right? So one of the areas you dig into is team building, especially again with maybe not able to offer a big salary, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area. What would be market rate? How did you build a team in these circumstances?
Yeah. In the beginning of building a company, you have to see the term having a team as really broad. I think if
Yeah.
you focus on, I need to have like 5 employees, 10 employees, you will feel like a failure all the time because it will take you a while before you get there. So I think that the trick is to consider that team really broad. Yes, the Bay Area is extremely expensive. The nice thing about the Bay Area is there are a lot of people with amazing experience here, and many of them are actually really willing to help. And so we had a bunch of people that we could bounce ideas off of. And what I think one takeaway of that was see them as part of your team. Like also follow up regularly so that they feel more part of your team. One thing we did that helped with that is once we had a couple of mentors and a handful of consultants working with us, we invited them to a happy hour all together. Mm-hmm. And it made the whole experience more feel like a team, because otherwise we would interact with one person, we'd thank them and then move on, and then it would take them just a month to follow up, right? Yeah. And we would do that with all these individuals. But by bringing them all together for just a simple happy hour, it made them realize that we were building something, that we weren't just relying on them for one little piece, but then not really pulling that through. It helped them understand that we were bringing people together with different skill sets, even though not as all full-time employees. We really had all those different experiences contributing to the company. And I think that helped with the feeling of having a team.
Yeah, people want to be part of something, right? And especially that culture in the Bay Area it's cool to be part of a startup and meaningful as well.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. And then we had a bunch of interns over the years work with us and say that's something else of like people always say, oh, we need to hire smart. And you can hire smart, right? Interns can be really smart, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be more experienced than yourself. So you can totally get a lot done with people that might have less experience. You will need to coach them a little bit more, so it might take a bit more of your time, but you can still get a lot done that way as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Another area you dig into is about the administrative chaos, I think is what you call it. What's a practical tip or hack you have for managing the administrative chaos?
Yeah, and I've tried to explain a little bit more what comes with it, because I think part of me wanting to write about that in the book was about just making it a bit more come to life, more an understanding of what you'll have to deal with. And yeah, you're saying these administrative tasks, so that can go from having to do your taxes, which probably people will realize once they have an entity that there is taxes or documents that you have to submit. But it also is about all these registrations that you need to stay on top of. Once you go for a grant application, you'll have to get into so many different steps to be able to apply for a grant from the government to begin with, and then have follow-ups there to make sure that those stay current. So that takes some of your time. I would even put some of the managing the IP in that bucket. Obviously, IP very important. Don't want to dismiss that. But there's a lot of administrative work that comes with it and having to stay on top of things. So even that of managing, making sure that you know when you have to submit from going from a provisional patent to a non-provisional patent, like making sure that you don't forget about those timelines. I would even put those tasks in that same category. So you asked about tips. The first one that I think I write about is something that I actually didn't use to the fullest extent myself. It came out in a conversation afterwards with an entrepreneur who said, I have this compliance calendar, and I just, anytime a task like this comes up, so the fact that I will need to submit in a year another document, she puts that in that Google Calendar that just is used for these compliance-like tasks. And over time, like in the beginning, it might just be one thing and it's just a year out, but it does build up over time. It helps you better understand what you need to do. Of course, like it will be, you won't forget as quickly about these things that way, but also it helps you understand that volume of work. Because I think at some point you have to understand you can't keep doing this. It might start with an hour a week, but it builds up and you don't want to spend full days doing this type of work. So we'll give you a better sense of what might you want to offload to someone else over time.
Yeah, it totally builds up over time, especially, if you're not taking each thing as you get it and understanding that task or deliverable or compliance component. If you have like some debt, some compliance debt, so to speak, not literal financial debt, although maybe that too, that would then be crushing at the point where you're trying to catch up. So it's like maintenance, like, you need to really be on top of it as it comes through, and that's much more manageable. To be able to do. Like, how much time would you say you were spending on compliance-oriented tasks with this type of behavior or pattern?
Yeah, it totally changes over time. It adds up, as I said. So in the beginning, it was maybe an hour here and there, and then it's like it becomes a couple hours a week.
Yeah.
At some point, I realized that this is really becoming too much. I'm spending like multiple hours on multiple days of the week on this. And it's where I mentioned interns before. Like in that case, it was someone who was doing some work at the incubator for a different company and wanted to get more exposure. And so she was able to join us. And it was about like buying different supplies that we needed for testing, staying on top of the types of topics that we just discussed. And so we were able to get some help from her in that case.
Yeah, because you don't want to be like crushed by something that is like kind of, I don't want to say boring, but like administrative or a bit tedious, that it's gonna, like, if you're behind on it and it catches up to you eventually, that can be like so distracting.
And some people love accounting, right? Like I mean,
not
they're accountants and they love it, and that's great. Like typically an entrepreneur signs up for a really cool project that I want to see through. And so then this all comes with it.
The bookkeeping of it all maybe isn't as glamorous as like the product development and customer discovery and all that. But we do talk a lot in some of our programs that I think you've participated in, like the Aspire program, of these types of challenges or unexpected hurdles or uncontrollable events that come up. We call them stress tests that come up that are not like, weren't in your plan, weren't in your roadmap, weren't on your to-do list. Do you have a stress test you could share with us and how you overcame it?
Yeah, definitely had a lot of examples in that regard as any entrepreneur. Maybe I'll share one from the early days. We were preparing for our first clinical study. This was actually still a pre-company, but we had gotten IRB approval to test out our very rough prototype in a small amount of patients. Already said this is about sweaty palms. So the nice thing about having working on a condition on the hands is that every patient comes with two hands. So you can test on one hand, the other one works as a built-in control. And so we were going to put our prototype on the left hands and keep the right hand as a control. That's kind of how we designed it. We put all the work together, submitted to the IRB, that got approved. And so we had been able to identify a first patient who was going to participate in that small proof of concept study. And the day before the prototypes come back from the small manufacturer who was working with us on it, and they had given us right-handed prototypes. Initially, you might think, oh, not a big deal, like you'll just switch around. But we had submitted the documents to the IRB, so we couldn't really just change that. All of our manuals about like the training of how to use this device, it was all talking about the left hand, not the right hand. So there was definitely some stress at that point. We ended up having to really just think about what can we do here? I mean, we're happy to just change all these documents around, but how can we get to the IRB to get them to approve this change in the protocol?
Yeah.
So that's where you really trying to just get it all done. And I ended up finding the phone number of someone who was on that committee. Called them late at night. Luckily, they were able to help and gave us some advice on how we could submit and advocate for a fast change in it. And so we were able to solve it really quickly, luckily.
But it's a really good example. Like those prototypes were like, your first babies in many ways. Like so much time and effort went into getting them, and they're just there for the right hand, and you got IRB approval for the left hand. Like it's just a technicality that's very, very important to everyone involved, and making those all work together. Sounds like you hustled for and made it work. So well done.
Yes, you can laugh afterwards, but in the moment,
sure, it wasn't funny at the time. Yeah. Very cool. Well, I really recommend this book. I won't ask you to summarize any more advice like in detail from it. I have one more question though, but I just want to, really plug this book. Especially, it's not just about like lean innovation or customer discovery. That's, a tenet, I believe, of your philosophy, but like this is really a book for like the things that people don't talk about enough, that like entrepreneurs don't even know. They like understand that there might be something that they haven't thought about yet, or they're aware that there's this like set of tasks that they should be doing, but like it's hard to itemize it, honestly. And you do a really good job of really helping to walk through herding the cats, all of the compliance calendar tasks that might need to go on there. So highly recommend it. But you should get all the advice from the book. But Veronique, do you have like one thing you wished you had learned sooner about entrepreneurship before you had started?
Yeah, and I've alluded to it a little bit before. We're no longer operational with the company. And that was definitely a hard journey, realizing it. And unfortunately, that's the case for many entrepreneurs. You really wanted to be successful. In our case, COVID came in the middle right when I was raising our Series A financing round. And there were just circumstances that I just couldn't do anything about, and realized that it would be better to close operations of the company. But as hard as that was, now a couple of years out, also just realizing that you can, even if your company is not successful, that doesn't mean that you can't be successful as a person and in your career. Just that realization that an ROI doesn't always have to be a financial ROI. It'd be really nice to have that, but you learn so much going through that experience. I'm now working in a big biotech company, and there are so many things that I learned going through the experience of being an entrepreneur that I can now apply in my day-to-day job as well. And that I think people really appreciate in the way I work, the scrappy mindset of just finding solutions when people think that there are none, just the ability to dive into topics that you don't know well, and just, yes, maybe there is a more qualified person to do it, but if they're not there at the moment, or you can't pay for them, or whatever it is, just then the willingness to be able to dive in and get it done yourself, that will help you anywhere else as well. And so the experiential ROI that you can get is really valuable as well. And I wish, like, definitely in those dark days where it wasn't going well, I wish I would have really realized that more. It would have made it maybe less of a burden at the time.
Yeah. The experience is hard won, but very valuable. You really you earned your stripes through that process, and I'm so proud of where you've ended up, right? As you said, a very successful career in biotech, published author. You have so much to be proud of. It's been a pleasure to watch the journey, the highs and the lows. Thank you for bringing me along in that. And speaking of the lows, I think it's important to acknowledge that we do need to take care of ourselves, especially when things are tough. And I hope that you've brought some lessons learned on how to take care of yourself into your life now. Is there anything that you want to share that you do to help stay sane?
Yeah, I'd say that maybe has varied for me over time, and even it can be different things at different moments. I think sometimes it can be about, as an introvert, it can be more about finding some time for myself, maybe playing the piano, going for a run. Other times it might be just calling up another entrepreneur and just vent a little bit, or finding ways to just share and share out what you're struggling with. So it does vary for me. It's not this one thing that I would always do. Also, maybe one thing I learned, that we were at an incubator for innovation, and one of the mentors there brought in a mindfulness expert and got us into that, which was really interesting. I can't claim that I really use that as an entrepreneur, but maybe I would. I definitely try and do more of just that now, is reflecting, being calm, and just taking 10 minutes to get kind of all the thoughts out of your mind and clear up.
I think that's very important. And it sounds like it's been helpful, right, for you to take that mindfulness and really to reflect on the value of the experiential return on investment that you had through this experience. It's hard to get there. You have to be a little bit removed from the experience to see the value in it sometimes. And it sounds like you've been able to do that, which is lovely to hear. I'm so excited for you, Veronique. Thank you for joining
Thank
the
you.
podcast today. We'll include links to the resources and, of course, the book that we mentioned. And stay tuned for more episodes. Thanks, Veronique, for joining.
Thanks so much, Christina.
All right, take care.